You're watching Around the World, our top global stories. It has been more than 72 hours since the devastating earthquakes struck Turkey and Syria, and the race to find survivors is far from over. The death toll has crossed the 16,000 mark in both the countries, and it's expected to rise further, even as Turkey's President Erdogan is caught in the middle of accepting problems with slow relief response and defending his government. Disaster experts consider the 72-hour period as the most likely window to save lives, but the death toll has already risen to at least 13,000 in Turkey and nearly 3,000 in Syria, bringing the confirmed total to over 16,000. The toll is likely to climb up further even as freezing weather and multiple aftershocks have hampered rescue efforts despite international assistance coming in. 2 people were pulled out alive from the rubble in southeastern Turkey more than 72 hours after the quake struck. An injured woman was saved from under the rubble in Diyarbakir in Turkey. In the same hour, another girl was rescued in Antakya in Turkey. Her father was rescued 2 hours later from the same rubble, the father whispering, "I love you all," to the rescue teams. These are just a few of the thousands of rescue efforts that played out in freezing temperatures amidst rain and snow. Meanwhile, in Syria, volunteers and civil defense teams continue to pull out survivors and dead bodies. However, rescue operations are slow due to a lack of heavy machinery and well-equipped teams. Nearly 3 lakh people have been forced to leave their homes in Syria. International aid has also been pouring in. The World Health Organization is sending expert teams and special flights with medical supplies. The US Defense Department has sent personnel and aid, including urban search and rescue teams. The sortie arrived with about 160 people, 12 rescue dogs, and around 75,000 kilograms of specialized equipment. China, among others, has also sent more aid via the Red Cross as well. Visiting the epicenter of the quake, Turkey's President Erdogan accepted that there were problems with the slow disaster relief response. He also promised to build housing for those left without a home within 1 year in the affected provinces of Turkey. According to experts, the survival window for those trapped under the rubble is closing rapidly, but at the same time, it's surely too soon to abandon all hope just yet. Moving on, 2 weeks to go for the Ukraine war to complete a full year, and President Zelensky is clearly both frantic and anxious, warning world leaders that very little time is left to provide weaponry. Zelensky has demanded fighter jets and long-range missiles, in addition to the tanks that Western nations recently committed to supplying. After taking his request for fighter jets to the United Kingdom, Zelensky took his bid forward and met with France's Emmanuel Macron and Germany's Olaf Scholz in Paris. Both the leaders reinstated their belief that Russia must not win the war, even as both have at times faced criticism for being too slow to support Ukraine. Right after that meeting in Paris, Macron and Zelensky together left for Brussels, where Zelensky is lobbying with the entire European Union for fighter jets. And German Chancellor Olaf Scholz too soon reached Brussels from Paris.
We are coming together here today to send a signal of solidarity and unity in supporting Ukraine, a very important thing that we have succeeded in for nearly a year since the war broke out.
Zelensky's visit to Brussels follows his address in the Parliament in the United Kingdom on Wednesday, where he urged the country to supply fighter jets to support Ukraine's war efforts. Zelensky was on a surprise visit to London days before the completion of 1 year to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. His jam-packed schedule in London saw him meet Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, followed by an address in the UK Parliament.
We know freedom will win. We know Russia will lose.
Zelensky made a strong pitch for Western, specifically British fighter jets. While the UK did not commit to providing any kind of aircraft, it announced that it would train Ukrainian troops to fly NATO fighter jets. President Zelensky also met with King Charles III at the Buckingham Palace, where he thanked the king for his country's support to the Ukrainian refugees. And even while Zelensky musters support, Russia has warned that there would be a response from Moscow if anyone did provide Ukraine with fighter aircraft. And even as Russia launches new offensives in Ukraine, NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg was in Washington, D.C. for meetings with top national security officials in the Biden administration to discuss defense assistance for Ukraine. And here's what U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken had to say.
Why does the U.S. continue to oppose?
What's vital is not just a particular weapon system, a piece of equipment. Equally important is the ability of Ukrainians to use it effectively, and that requires, in some cases, significant training. Equally important is the ability to maintain it.
Up next, Roger Waters, co-founder of Pink Floyd, the iconic rock band. Roger Waters addressed the United Nations Security Council at the request of and in support of Russia. In his speech, Waters told the Council that the invasion of Ukraine by Russia was, quote-unquote, not unprovoked. Russia had requested this meeting to discuss the prospects for a peaceful settlement in the backdrop of increasing supply of Western weaponry to Ukraine, but Waters was clearly Pink Floyd as his statements drew the ire of the members of the United Nations Security Council. Richard Mills, the U.S. Deputy Ambassador to the UN, said that we've been brought together to once again hear another version of why Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine is actually the fault of Ukraine or Ukraine's partners. Ukraine's ambassador to the UN was even more dismissive of Waters' comments.
In 1979, Pink Floyd came up with a song, Another Brick in the Wall. The same year, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and after the invasion was condemned by Pink Floyd, the band was banned in the Soviet Union. It is ironic, if not hypercritical, that Mr. Waters attempts now to whitewash another invasion. How sad for his former fans to see him accepting the role of just a brick in the wall of Russian disinformation and propaganda.
Now, this is not Roger Waters' first fall from grace. His loose cannon remarks about global affairs is something that's not new. He had miffed the entire Indian community earlier with his uncalled for remarks on Kashmir as well. Shifting focus to North Korea. North Korea is celebrating the 75th founding anniversary of its Korean People's Army, an event where Kim Jong-un chose to parade his daughter as a possible successor again. This comes at a time of heightened tensions with the US and South Korea. Kim Jong-un presided over a huge military parade. Both his wife and daughter were in attendance. Military troops and civilians gathered to glorify Kim's rule, to showcase missiles and latest military hardware. This came after weeks of troops preparing for the parade. And more importantly, it was meant to show off North Korea's nuclear arsenal. North Korea last conducted a nuclear test in 2017 and is now gearing up for another one very soon, stoking concerns for the US and allies South Korea and Japan and the world in general, even as people laid flowers to the statue of the country's founders, Kim Jong-un's father and grandfather, to mark the Army's 75th anniversary. The Kim family has been ruling over North Korea for more than 3 generations, since the year 1948, and still very little is known about the family and is publicly confirmed. But Kim Jong-un's daughter, Kim Joo-ae, making her 4th public appearance is certainly something. She stood next to her father and shook hands with all the top military officials of North Korea. Kim Joo-ae even dressed like her father in a black suit and a white shirt. The father and daughter duo walked down the red carpet holding hands. And finally, they sat next to each other right through the whole event. Earlier in November 2022 as well, Kim Joo-ae was said to have been there for the test of an intercontinental ballistic missile, where she accompanied her father to a meeting with military scientists and an inspection of ballistic missiles. Pyongyang conducted over 70 ballistic missile tests in the year 2022. And officials in South Korea and the US have assessed that North Korea has completed preparations for a nuclear weapons test. Just 10 days ago, on the 31st of January, US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin visited Seoul for the South Korean and US Defense Ministerial meeting to strengthen the cooperation between the two allies, and that later resulted in a joint air drill featuring American strategic bombers and stealth fighter planes. The allies announced that this was in response to North Korea testing ballistic missiles. North Korea says this would turn the Korean peninsula into a critical war zone and has already pushed the situation to an extreme red line. Under South Korea's President Yoon Suk-yeol, South Korea has adopted a tit-for-tat policy to respond to North Korea. While the US is trying to restrain South Korea, Yoon's tit-for-tat policy can turn things into a war-like situation. In the meanwhile, North Korea is already gearing up for war. North Korea's Central News Agency reported that the Supreme Army of North Korea's officials are intensifying and expanding the military drills to ensure war readiness. Earlier in January, Kim Jong-un pledged to exponentially increase the country's nuclear arsenal and mass production of tactical nuclear weapons. South Korea's defense ministry said that a North Korean balloon crossed borders into their airspace, just like what happened in the US with the Chinese spy balloon. However, unlike the US, South Korea ended the operation and declared that the balloon does not pose a security threat. And finally, the world-famous Venice Carnival, a 1,000-year-old tradition and one of the most famous street festivals in the world. The celebrations kicked off with a traditional parade along the Grand Canal, led by a huge boat depicting a giant water rat. The carnival tradition began in Venice during the 11th century and has attracted huge numbers of visitors ever since. This year, the Venice Carnival runs from the 4th of February to the 21st of February, leading into the Roman Catholic period of Lent. The festive procession sailed across the city of water, with performers wearing colorful traditional costumes and, of course, masks. During the carnival in Venice, masks provide an air of mystery, the covering of faces symbolizing a desire for freedom and transgression, a means of assuming a secret identity. While masks are a common sight in Venice, inside stores across the year, it's carnival time and only the most intricate and opulent masks will do. Hundreds of shops line Venice City's canals selling masks and costumes, but only few people are trained in one of Venice's oldest crafts, the ancient skill of paper mache. The experts are known as machereri, true artisans who make eye-catching face coverings. They fashion the most bizarre and fantastical creations by hand. And these master craftsmen are teaching the traditional art of mask making in Venice to tourists as well. For 50 euros, you can take a master class in how to design your own very Venetian mask. Centuries ago, thanks to the anonymity that the masks brought, barriers between social classes disappeared, and the authorities even turned a blind eye to the public mockery of the city's leaders and aristocracy. The masqueraders were no longer known by their noble or reverential titles, but each person was greeted with a "Good morning, Mr. Mask" or "Good morning, Mrs. Mask." Slowly, the carnival became an integral part of the lives of Venetians, the period of festivities extending over many months even. In the 18th century, it lasted as long as 6 months at a stretch. However, in the recent past, the carnival has been limited to just around 10 to 15 days on average. And that's all we have time for in this edition of Around the World. Thank you so much for watching. Keep it with News 9+.